Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 15.3 support tier list. So if you want content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw buffs towards Swain, Rakan, and Fresh, and a slight tap down to Rel and Galio. Past that, there weren't any hugely direct changes. I have moved some other things around. Obviously, we had the domination keystone buffs this patch, so some champions like your Elises, your LeBlancs have definitely benefited from that. But let's get into the video. So the detail is going to consist of the same for champions. I have actually opted into removing Twitch. Twitch's support play rate has once again gone really low. He gained a bit of a spike back when he received the AP ratio buff on his W, but he was still massively underperforming. The champion has just never really found his footing ever since they got rid of Crown of the Shattered Queen. That item was kind of propping him up in support. Past that, they also nerfed some of his AP ratios, I believe primarily because he was doing quite well in mid lane, and he was a frustration point within the support role. He's gone back to just not really being played, so I have opted into removing him. The other three champions which remain here, though, are Ashe, Malphite, and Veigar. In Ashe's case, she has been relatively weak for a while as a support option. Other than that, though, she has received direct nerfs going into 15.1, which led her to being a weaker champion. In 15.4, she's actually being buffed, with the intention, I believe, to kind of buff up some of her power within the support role and within the ADC role. The champion's receiving a bit more AP ratio on her ultimate, combined with the AoE on the splash of the ultimates, now doing full damage instead of 50%. That should be some decent power to the champion. Do I think this will suddenly make Ashe support a viable meta option? Probably not. But if you are comfortable playing the pick, you're opting into a Halo Blades, lane bully kind of playstyle, you're opting into a bit of AP, then the champion will be definitely better for it. In Veigar's case, he's a bit gimmicky as the support option, mostly being paired alongside the likes of Ziggs or a Poppy, and you just play around the cage and what interactions you can kind of abuse with it. You're not really going to see this pick in support outside of maybe your lower ranks. The higher ranks ones will just play around the fact that he can go opt into a lot of movement speed and then just look for those cage angles where he can. We obviously saw Mickey play it back a year or two ago. It's not the same champion. The AP ratio nerfs have definitely hit him quite a bit, now forcing him to get more levels, leading him more likely to being in the mid lane more than anything in his current state. Champion definitely not performing that well as a support option, remains as a D tier pick. Malphite has the premise of being a support pick, the harass with the Q, the all-in with the ultimate, but he just ends up needing a bit too much gold to really be self-sufficient here. He can obviously land ultimates, and if you have good synergies or pairings with it, it can do something. It can be a useful pick, but once again, he needs a bit of gold to really get going. Other than that, he will just be pushed over in lane. He only really has the Q for harass, and then utilizing that just to chunk people out, not having as much XP, meaning you're not getting the points in that ability as quick, can definitely hurt him quite a bit. So he does remain as a D tier option. Moving on to the C tier, then we have Silas and Amumu, who remain as picks here. In Amumu's case, he just doesn't have a great main item for the support role. The lack of Even Shroud and Radiant Virtue has just caused him to be a bit weaker here, but he's still relatively easy to play and has access to a lot of CC, so I don't think he is completely non-viable as an option here. In Silas's case, he benefited from the electrocute changes, so you can opt into that keystone once again as a support, and being the removal of Eyeball Collection for some more vision key runes has definitely helped supports quite a bit, like your Pikes and your Silases in this example do prefer having that as giving more vision across the map when they are playing support. Obviously, you do want the adaptive from the eyeballs, so that does suck, but they have gained it through flat damage on electrocute and or power just through Halo Blades, which has been good for them. They've definitely benefited from that. Silas still wants to come out as a counter pick primarily into your Varus, your Leonas, your Ashes, where you can still ultimate and then utilize it against them to get picks or force out certain things. He's not great as a support option, and the joke with Silas is always he scales with less CS, so that would usually make him as an idea more viable in the support role, but he still does want a decent amount of gold, and XP can still be quite a valuable thing on him. He has pretty aggressive level growth as a champion. Two champions dropping down are Renata and Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank just hasn't been performing that well for a while. Through like a decent chunk of nerfs he received last split, he was like on the decline. This season just hasn't really benefited him. He's definitely been in a bit of a bad spot, and he does drop all the way down to the C tier now. I'm honestly surprised they don't buff him, but I presume that would be more of a frustration thing than just like a power thing. So as long as his ban rate stays relatively high, I imagine they're happy to keep him within the lower tiers. Renata, on the other hand, tends to be a bit more elite skewed. This champion relies a bit more on pairings, like your Kalista pairing, for example, and then rotating her passive combined with finding good ult angles. She's conditional in a lot of circumstances, and then relies on having a good ADC to pair alongside her. She's also not the easiest to play, and she drops down as a C tier option. Moving on to the B tier, then we have Teemo, who scales the lower rank you go. Like, this champion's pretty good in low MMR and all the way into like mid MMR. Like, as a support option, he can function decently well. Like, having points in your queue and being able to just blind the enemy carry reduces their ability to snowball and take over the game. That can be quite an effective ability. Combined with having shrooms, your scaling, he's not a bad support option. The nerfs this patch do hit him, and he is getting jungle compensation at 15.4. He does sit towards the low end of the B tier. Like, I don't think this is a pick you should be playing every single game. I think he's a bit conditional, and he tends to be very low elo skewed. Outside of that, he doesn't really translate into your higher ranks, so yeah, sits as a low B tier option. We've got the likes of Pyke, who sit within the B tier. The Halo Blades change for this patch was nice for him. He's still an incredibly elite skewed support, one of, if not just the most elite skewed support in the game, relying completely on like early game snowballing, takedowns, landing every single bone skewer you throw, or at least like creating a lot of pressure. Just that like maintaining of pressure early onto the game can be really challenging for most mid and low elo players. It's a pick I don't really recommend until you are like Master Plus and you have a really solid understanding of how to play an assassin within the support role, as he is very unique in the way he functions. Rakan got buffed this patch. He still sits as a B2 option. He underperforms for the most part in average and low MMRs. In high, he is decent, and in competitive, I believe he is one of the higher prio supports at the moment. The WCD change was bad. Like, they just shouldn't have done it. It was going to obviously be more power for higher MMRs, where you are going to get less XP as a support, traditionally through roaming, through just like giving your ADC more resources, and having that extra CD early on to the game, yeah, benefits up there more. So bad change in my opinion. Should have gone after like late game power, that tends to be a lot more skewed towards like your average player. Overall though, he still underperforms in mid and low MMR brackets. I believe the champion could do with a bit more for these kind of areas, but can't really, but is already like at the top for like competitive, so can't really give him much more power in his current state. Alistar sits as a low B2 option. The champion is kind of akin to Rakan, and he performs decently alright in competitive, I believe, at the moment, and like elite he's still deemed decent, but struggles for like mid and low MMR. A lot of the engaged supports are really struggling around that area currently, mostly because they come out more generalistically, and they tend to require more out of the piloter of the champion to really get value within the game, whereas Lulu requires a lot out of the ADC to really like find her like carry and just like her footing within the game. Champions like Rakan and Ali, I think, are solid options if you are very comfortable on them. If you're not, then they're not mandatory at the moment. You don't need to play an engaged support. It's why the likes of Nautilus, even though he is perceived as being very strong at the moment, is being buffed in 15.4. They are buffing his Q damage. Makes sense. They don't want to buff his E damage. Then concerns of lane Nautilus come back. He sits as a low beta option at the moment. He's very volatile. Oftentimes, you'll find he gets picked a lot purely because he is deemed blindable. Even though things like Braum, for example, are very good like options into like your Braum, into your Nautiluses and your Alistars. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend Nautilus at the moment. purely on a volatility basis. But if you are looking for an engaged support with a point-and-click ultimate, which can have value most games, then Nautilus isn't a bad option. I just think he is slightly on the weaker side at the moment. Yuumi sits as a beta option. Yuumi got buffed more recently. She really benefited from those buffs combined with Axiom Arcanist being added to the game. She's in a decent spot at the moment. She is, compared to where she has been at least, like I think for the last year, I would say this champion has been weak to basically non-viable. But now with the right pairing, she is in a pretty decent spot. Like Zeri Yuumi, for example, is a very solid bot lane. If you're comfortable playing it, then yeah, you can definitely find results on it in its current state. Leona sits as a beta option, just direct nerfs, kind of akin to like, she isn't a champion, which I'll say she's like akin to. This pick just has received like direct armor nerfs and just chip damage down, and it's just led her to being weaker. The Bloodsong nerfs have also hurt her, and she, just continued to drop. She now sits in the beta. I would say a higher beta option than like your Nautiluses, your Allies, stuff like that, but not like absurdly like far away. Like I think these champions do sit in the same tier now. Fresh is actually going to move up, so I'll talk about Fresh in a second. Mel sits as a beta option. Mel support looks to be her weakest role. I'm not really going to recommend it, especially going to 15.4 where she is being nerfed. This champion's just not going to be really supported in the support role long term. I believe she will just be played mid and then bot lane as a flex, kind of akin to like a Hui, for example. She would probably still see some support games here and there. Zac is very unpopular to the point where I almost just removed him from the support tier list. He received some direct nerfs and it kind of focused around nerfing his lane, and that did have an impact support because support does rely on some of the same levers that lane Zac does. He doesn't sustain as much anymore. His harass is a bit down, and it's just led him to being a bit weaker within the support role. There's still an item slot missing on like your Shens, your Zacs, your Amumus, your Gallios of this world. Like they do miss even Shroud and Radiant Virtue. I think not having those two items in the game has sucked for certain like champions within the support role. Even like your Alistars, for example, are really hurt by that kind of thing. Shen also sits within the beta. He comes out as a conditional counterpick to Leona traditionally, where you can utilize your W to deny her Q, thus like giving you more of a window to react him and fight back. Shen has good early game based damage. It can allow him to be quite oppressive in specific lanes, but he is a bit weaker now, and combined with some of the tank nerfs going into 15.4, I don't suddenly see any of these champions like going back up in the tier list. Seraphine just been underperforming as of more recent within the support role. I think she's fine. She's a good jack of all trades utility option within the support role. You can itemize into damage, you can itemize into utility, and I'd say she is just fine in her current state. If you enjoy her, you can find results. And if you're comfortable on her, if you're not, she's not mandatory by any means. I think she pairs nicely alongside the like sort of an Ashe, but Ashe ADC is in a pretty bad spot at the moment. I think with the 15.4 buffs, it could definitely be better. I don't think it will suddenly be meta though. I think Ashe is a bit far from that in her current state, especially for solo queue. Seraphine, sits as more like a beta option at the moment. Your Zoes, your LeBlancs, actually Zoe and LeBlanc, and I guess to an extent Morgana benefited from the domination tree buffs. The Dark Harvest buff will help Morgana. She opts into that every so often. If you're going like a Liandry build, it makes her W an ability. If you don't and you're opting into more utility, her W just ends up being a 1-point wonder. You don't really use it that much outside of maybe like shoving waves here and there. Her Q is where a lot of her power comes from in utility. I think she's close to A tier. I don't think Morgana's bad in her current state. I think she's actually like fine, I would say, but she does have limitations, and I'd say that prohibits her from being moved up into the A tier at the moment. Zoe and LeBlanc benefit from Electrocute being buffed this patch. They're still harder to pilot support options, but if you're very comfortable on them, they can very comfortably get you results. They do a lot of damage. They circumvent some of their bigger weaknesses, which is CSing, especially in like LeBlanc's case. She hates being stuck on the wave. If she could just like freely roam about, look for angles to just one-shot someone and then back out, it really helps the champion. And I believe for solo queue especially, LeBlanc support is a better way to play the champion than LeBlanc mid. I think it just circumvents some of her biggest like issues as a champion, combined with it makes her a bit easier to play. I think CSing and laning is a bit harder, especially when you are playing some of these champions, and it circumvents that kind of thing. But other ones here are like your Huis and your Gallios. I think Hui is a fine champion in the support role. The nerfs in 15.4 will probably tag it a bit though, and I could definitely see it dropping down. Right now though, he has decent utility. He just has a lot of tools accessible to him. Just decent damage. He scales relatively well. His wave clear and his like ability to just shove does not, or it doesn't apply as much here. Like, that is going to be a bit more of a non-factor, but his harass is decent, so you can still make him work in this role. Galio, akin to like your Shens and your Zax, struggles with the fact that there isn't a Radiant or an even Shroud in the game at the moment, and yeah, these three champions are definitely set towards the low end of the beta, plus direct nerfs to him this patch for minus 38 health, I believe it was, has meant something. When you are sat on less health level 1, you are going to more consistently lose like early trades and not be able to stay in lane as long, and that, yeah, matters. Brand sits within the beta. I don't like Brand as a champion at the moment. Even though Dark Harvest got buffed this patch, I still think he is on the weak side for a champion, which should be one of the better options, especially in mid and low MMR, which is what this tier list is targeted towards. He can work, like, you can still carry games on Brand. He's just not the same champion as he was most of last split. Obviously, Jungle Brand has had a bit of an impact on him and has definitely left him in a bit of a weaker spot. Moving down is Tahm Kench. So Tahm Kench became a very popular champion to just complain about on Twitter. Riot noticed, and they nerfed him a couple of times. In fact, they nerfed his AP ratio builds, they nerfed his flat armor, and then they nerfed his flat Q damage, and that has really hurt support Tahm Kench. She is no longer a hidden, like, really strong option where you can go Hearthstone and just play him like a normal, like, top lane tank. He now actually has to, like, get a lot of a good amount of resources. You are losing a decent amount of your damage. Your all-ins aren't going to be as strong. You're not going to be as durable, and that does suck for the champion. He does find himself within the B tier now. Moving on to the A tier, then we actually one other champion moving up to the B tier is Swain. Swain benefited from his buffs this patch. The plus 3 health per soul combined with the 10% AP ratio on E was nice. I still don't like support Swain. It falls into the same bracket as Morgana, where I'm not a huge fan of recommending these champions. I will recommend the likes of Morgana jungle over Morgana support, and I'll recommend Swain mid or Swain bot lane over Swain support, because I think these champions are very selfish in what they want if they want to be useful. Otherwise, they just end up being like a E or a Q bot, and you're just like hoping that like your ADC does enough damage to follow up. And I think it just becomes a bit more of a passenger kind of like role, where you're just not really giving what you want to your team or what you really like want as a champion a lot of the time. Moving on to the A tier, then we have Bard, who is a very unique champion, but still very strong if you pilot it well. If you don't pilot it well, he's not mandatory at the moment, and you do want to pilot the pick well. Like, if you pilot him badly, your allies will notice a lot of the time. Like, you want to land good ultimates, you want to be outputting a lot of damage, finding those like auto Q, auto angles where you can like chunk out enemy mid laner by like 400-500 health, and then like creating chaos or just being a nuisance around the map, making sure you're stacking your chimes, roaming, getting vision down. He demands a lot out of the player, and I would recommend putting a lot of practice into Bard if you're going to play him, but I think he's in a pretty good spot at the moment. Pantheon sits in the A tier at the moment. This champion has definitely benefited from, not direct buffs, but like meta shifts more than anything as of recent. I think he is a low A tier option. The pick does require like early game aggression and snowballing. I do believe he is easier to play than Pyke, so I will recommend him over Pyke in mid and low MMR. I think in high MMR, you could probably, but I would probably recommend Pyke over him, although I still think early aggression is very key up there, so I think both these champions do benefit in Master Plus games more than anything. And yeah, I'd say he's a solid 4-way flex pick, which can four-way flex pick, which can function quite nicely as a support as well. Elise sits as a high A tier option. This champion is long term, if it wasn't being adjusted next patch, probably overpowered. It is a very hard to pilot pick, and a lot of support players have never really played Elise before, which is obviously going to deflate her win rate. That being said, though, her win rate is still pretty good. She is still a very oppressive option, does a lot of damage in the support role. It makes sense why support Elise would be strong, like just having access to a lot of base damage combined with like a really powerful snare on the E. Just gives her a lot of tools, and yeah, she is a great A tier pick at the moment. Nico, pretty unique, but still I mean, her main role is support at this point. I should probably just start treating her like she is a support option rather than a mid option. And yeah, her laning's quite impressive. Her ability to like find angles, like be able to like transform into minions and then like play on the wave and disrupt the entire map can be quite a potent tool, and if you pilot it well, she can quite comfortably net you wins. I think Nico, once again, like some of the other options towards the low A tier, isn't a mandatory pick to have within your arsenal, but if you can play it, you will really benefit from having a champion like Nico accessible to you. Fiddle, Shaco, two very unique picks, both actually pretty strong within the support role. I think Fiddle support is one of the surprising ones where, like, unless you've played with it, it seems like it will be a bit more of a troll pick, but when you play with a Fiddle support, or like you've had a Fiddle support on your team, I've always found they've performed incredibly well. They know what they're, like, if they are mains at the champion, they know what they want to do, they know how to, like, win the lane, or achieve a, like, an advantage within the lane, and then their ultimate is an incredibly powerful tool. The amount of CC they have access to is incredible. Like, this champion, I think, is an incredibly good support. It is slept on. It's not the same as, like, the pre-rework Fiddle with, like, the bouncing Q on the Crow. Bouncing Crow on the Q. This champion, yeah, is a bit different, but still, I'd say a very solid support option at the moment. Definitely recommend trying it if you enjoy that kind of playstyle. Once again, not mandatory. Shaco obviously seems to have a bug with him like every other patch with like Axiom Arcanist or Malignance on his boxes. This is a coding issue, obviously, and they do fix it every patch after the bug has been noticed. But the champion's still decent. Like, he is a great support option. He has access to a lot of damage. He has great scaling. He has great control. You can play him as an AD option. I wouldn't recommend it outside of like very specific circumstances where maybe you need a bit more AD within your draft. AP Shaco works really nicely as a support. Champions which have a hard time disarming your boxes really struggle against this champion, and he will win a lot of matchups just through boxes and champions not really having the tools to disarm them. Other than that, Dark Harvest got buffed. Halo Rage got buffed, so if you're opting into that, then you can. Arcane Comet still is an option on him. He's a very solid A tier pick. Zillion is always here. He's not been adjusted in like 6 years. This champion has just an insane amount of utility. His movement speed, his slows, his base damage on the Q is still very high and hasn't really been buffed up. I mean, it just hasn't been buffed up in a long time, so that's just always kind of been there for him. The CC on that is very nice, combined with the ultimate. Some of the builds you can go, like the more tanky builds with like the 5 Kindle gems, for example, just gives this champion a lot of power, and he is a very deserving A tier option at the moment. Maokai sits within the A tier. He has kind of found his footing again within the support role. He still really likes Trailblazer as an item and just movement speed in general. The buffs to Symbiotic Souls in 15.4 should be good for him if he opts into that, and some of the other supports would definitely benefit, like your Alistars, for example, if they opt into Symbiotic Souls, will really like that item now. But yeah, Maokai, very easy to play as a support option. Great CC, great lockdown, great powerful ultimate. He's a very solid A tier option at the moment. Senna, doing fine. The champion obviously has the 2 build variations where you go the utility like Cleaver variant, or you go the just full enchanter variant with like your Echoes, Moonstone, and Dawncore trio of items. Ardent Center, really powerful at the moment. You can opt into it into compositions where multiple people can benefit from it, but there are other options like your lockets and things which can be quite nice on her as well. She's a pretty solid A tier pick. Soraka, Sona, also very solid enchanters. Both these picks can be very powerful in like a range of situations. Soraka, once again, is another champion which is kind of akin to Seraphine, benefits from having Ashe in the lane. Ashe is weak though. Soraka's going to lose a bit from that, but she's still a great enchanter option if you can consistently get through laning phase. Her heals are some of the strongest in the game, and yeah, she is a very powerful pick. Sona, more mid to late game focus. She's not an insane late game scaler. I think a lot of people confuse her same as Victor, to be honest, where they think these champions are like Thanos later into the game. They're good picks, don't get me wrong, they're better than average, but they aren't they spike once they've gotten their full stacks or full evolves. Sona spikes once she has that 60 stacks on Crescendo. That is her most potent and powerful point within the game. Being able to get some ults off CD earlier is nice, but it isn't the true best slot scaling option. She is just decent there. And yeah, I think people underestimate how strong Sona's laning phase can be. Bloodsong is weaker now, so I'd recommend leaning more towards Dreammaker, but you can still opt into Bloodsong in certain circumstances. But yeah, overall, I'd say this champion sits as a solid A tier pick at the moment. Milio sits as a high A tier option. He's just a bit more conditional. I think this champion can compete quite comfortably with some of the S tier picks if you pair him alongside champions which benefit from his range and his constant application on his W. He's a pretty solid pick here. Taric Braum, great anti-engage options. They are very good at what they do. Just having access to, that's Poppy, that's not Taric. Both these champions have great, Taric's case, great damage, great powerful ultimate. The pick does synergize really nicely with like Niders, for example, and engaged ADCs can really value him as an option. In Braum's case, he's great into like your Nautiluses, your Leonas, for example, champions which if they play into him, he can then reflect and or just like block and then utilize his passive or his ability to just stand in front of the ADC to deny them from being able to really play and function in the game how they would traditionally want to. So Braum, this is a very solid A2 option, great into compositions against like an Ornn, for example, where you can block his ultimate and just deny most engage through that. The damage options I have within the A tier are the likes of Lux and Vel'Koz and Xerath. I think all these picks are very, very solid options if you are looking for a bit more damage within your arsenal. I think Vel'Koz is probably my favourite out of the three of them, mostly because he got more recently buffed and definitely benefited from his buffs more than the other two had been like performing. They all really value Horizon. Well, I say they all. Vel'Koz and Xerath really value Horizon Focus. I think Lux can opt into it as a second item, but Lux needs a lot of gold traditionally to really function as a support. The other two, not so much, but still value it quite a bit. Lux can also go like a utility build, but you feel a lot less impactful when you go that kind of route, and I'd recommend just traditionally playing these champions as like damage options and hoping you have a bit more agency within the game. And then Rel drops down to the A tier. Actually, Rel and Thresh. I'll put Thresh like mid-A. I think he's not quite like the highest of the A2 options, but he really benefited from his buffs this patch, being able to trade more frequently. I think Thresh is getting close to being a pick which won't maybe not see competitive, but like actually he might with like with the IE changes next patch and like Jinx really on the rise and Aphelios, there might be times where like we do start seeing Thresh, but I think the champion's definitely in a better spot at the moment. The E trading is up and that really helps him. He can do more damage within lane. He's got quite aggressive AP ratios and scaling, and yeah, I'd say he's a very solid A tier pick at the moment. He's a bit of a jack of all trades as well. In Rel's case, she just received some direct power down. I believe it was base health and armor, and maybe some armor growth as well. This champion's just a bit less durable. It's noticeable. You will burn through her a bit quicker, not get stuck so much in her like magnet field, whatever the ability is called. And yeah, that will definitely hurt her. It makes her less consistent, but she still sits as a very solid A tier option. Then my S tier picks. I'm going to lead off with Zyra. I think Zyra is the closest to dropping down. She definitely lost power with Zax being nerfed last patch. That combined with the not having like the same level of utility options, I think just means that she relies a bit more just being like selfish, not having like the same level of like a fallback pattern. She just has to output a lot of DPS, and if she doesn't, then she just lacks the same value as some of the other options. Karma is probably my next one along. She moves up from the A tier to the S tier. This champion really benefited from the Axiom Arcanist bug fix and just having it within the game, combined with having two different playstyles, the AP damage one with like the Malignance and the Horizon Focus can be quite impactful if you're able to get a lot of gold within the game. But even like the Moonstone Echoes like Enchanter build seems to be very performant at the moment. I think Karma's definitely in one of the better spots she's been in support for a while. She did receive a lot of direct buffs last season to try and make her viable again here, as she was very much underperforming, and I think we've finally gotten there as like her power is now. Poppy, Janna and Nami wrap up my S tier. Poppy really benefited from Halo Blades being buffed this patch. It once again kind of solidified her spot within the S tier. She is still primarily going to be a counter pick. You can't just blind this champion, but in spots where she is a counter pick, she is like the best like in slot. She is incredibly oppressive, does a huge amount of base damage, scales fine. Like, she doesn't fall off. Like, she will always have value with her W, and her ultimate is an incredibly powerful like tool to like get people out of the fight and being able to secure objectives. I really value her quite highly as a support pick. She stays within the S tier. I mean, Nami and Janna are still both very good enchanter options. Janna's ability to peel combined with her E80 steroid is a very, very valuable ability. Nami is very synergistic with more options than like the other champions on towards the top of this list. Like, Nami functions really well with AP options as well, unlike Janna, who mostly just wants to play with AD options. Nami works nice with like your Brands, your Hueys, for example, and some of the other AP picks like your Victors, but can also work really nicely with marksmen. So Nami, great high S tier option. And then Lulu, who is the premier pick of the patch. She is being nerfed in 15.4, rightfully so. This champion really benefited from the attack speed cap being moved up. Pairs really nicely with like your Kog'Maws, who is overperforming at the moment. The direct nerf towards Kog'Maw combined with the direct nerf towards Lulu should definitely drop her in power, but she still functions really nice with like Jinx, for example, who is like the premier pick of the ADC role at the moment. So I believe she'll stay as an S tier option. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.